Interpreters with us. Both Denise and Harris are joining us as ASL interpreters. And if you need ASL interpretation, please make sure that you pin their names to your view screen. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Monica Gabel. I'm a native Brightonian, not born and raised, but raised. And I currently reside here as well. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our board members for being here as well. I just wanted to take a moment so that we can all recognize that we're holding a lot of feelings while we sit here in our different spaces, and a lot of tension. And a lot of us hold on to this for a number of reasons. I'm sure some of these will come out during the discussion, but I'd like all of us to grant each other the respect to listen carefully and truly reflect and truly consider the damage that words can do. And I'll ask all of us to extend to one another the grace that allows us to empathize with one another, because so many of us are friends here, not just neighbors, and understand one another and just bring some acknowledgement to this discussion. We had planned to have Jewish Brightonians speak their truths, tell their stories or experiences with local anti-Semitism, but ultimately we couldn't make that a part of today because too many people are scared for their own safety. They're afraid of being mislabeled racists or oppressors, or worried that speaking up will affect their gainful employment. So as a result, we'll be following up after today with some of those stories, but we'll make them anonymous. We'll share them with you anonymously. And we'll provide some other resources should you want to learn more about some of the things that you heard during today's discussion. So the idea for this gathering originated from the circulation of information around social media. Incendiary, divisive rhetoric, comments, misinformation. We will refer to some of those statements later on during our question and answer session, but wanted you to know that Jews live in a heightened state of fear and awareness. And in the past weeks, we've learned that locally, the circulation of misinformation and the spread of Jew hatred in very subtle forms has become systemic. A post on social media can create fear, anxiety, concern, anger, and confusion. And when that's coupled with national, but importantly local upticks in anti-Jewish hate crimes, that's very triggering for a lot of us. Allow me while I share my screen, just a moment. Okay. I'm using Rami's computer and it's acting slow. So, Rami, if you have like the secret to making a slide advance, jump on in here.
Either space or arrow down.
Okay. Okay, well, while he's on his way to help, of course, we need to work together to build these bridges, right? So we are here to dispel some myths and understand how language can be misinterpreted. There we go. What is it, this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Our hope today is that all of us will walk away with a better understanding of how deeply rooted anti-Jewish speech is and the rhetoric has become, how many of us are threatened by it, and how our elected officials view this issue, as well as how they plan to protect Brighton residents. So a couple of words about these slides that you're seeing. First of all, obviously, there's a trigger warning here. If you have young ones around, or you know that you will be triggered by some of the conversation or images that you're about to see, just know that that's there. We're also going to be scrolling through a number of slides quite quickly, and this is not in the hopes that you read absolutely every word, but because we wanted to demonstrate the frequency and the volume of these incidents in the past month alone. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Ahavia Deutsch. She is currently the National Director of Organizing for Zioness, a grassroots organization dedicated to social justice. She is the former executive director of Rochester's Healthy Baby Network and the former executive director of the Workers' Justice Center of New York. As I said, Ahavia will be moderating today, and she'll be leading the question and answer portion of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Monica, do we want to go through these, or should I jump into my statement?
You can.
Monica, you're mute.
Oops. Well,
Thank you.
again, Rami, I'm pressing the space bar with no luck.
Yeah, guys, forgive the grassroots nature of the presentation. We are all learning as we go about putting on a webinar with the level of tech that we wanted to share with you all today. So let's see. So let's take a minute. Monica's going to be scrolling through some of these slides talking about what's been going on in the last few weeks. Since there has been an escalation in violence in the Middle East, there's been a huge spike in anti-Semitic hate crimes in the United States. The ADL reported a 75% increase, and they range from vandalism to physical assault to throwing explosives and fireworks, really quite a range. In my current role at Zioness, I talk to Jews all over the country who are engaged in social justice work, and I have heard countless stories of folks being told to go to their ovens, that Hitler was right, that they kill babies, and lots of blood libels and hate language used against Jews. So I will say, at least for me, and I'm sure you can hear it in my voice, this topic is really raw. There's a lot of pain right now. There's a lot of fear. And what I would like to do, and I think Monica's going to scroll through some of these slides some more while I'm talking, and you can take a look, just sort of seeing it mapped out. But what I would like to do, I think we're all familiar with some of the anti-Semitic tropes you see on the right of the aisle, right? When we talk about anti-Semitism from white supremacy, that language is familiar. That Jews own the banks, and Jews are non-white, and they're allying with Black and brown folks to attack white supremacy. That's the sort of KKK rhetoric about Jews that really lies at the heart of white supremacist movements. But on the left, the language used is a little bit different, but it has really become increasingly problematic and increasingly violent. So I have made my home in the left politically, and I feel deeply about these issues. So what I would like to do is call out some of the tropes and narratives that I see. And I will say that by and large, when I'm talking about anti-Semitism on the left, I'm talking about structural anti-Semitism. Of course, there are always some people who just say Jews are terrible and I hate them because they're Jews. But most of what I encounter is not that. It's that there are ideas about Jews in American culture. They're prevalent in our media, they're prevalent in our storytelling, and that those ideas give rise to a narrative, to a story about who Jews are. And that story informs the way people view and treat us. And this is structural anti-Semitism. It's not about consciously saying, oh, those Jews are terrible, but rather the unexamined bias of assumptions about Jewish people that results in Jews being treated differently, with less respect, accorded less safety, less personhood, less concern when they're harmed, and ultimately less dignity than other groups. So I'm going to identify some of those ideas and then share, at least from my perspective and the perspective of some of the organizers, and again, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, there's a lot of diversity of thought about this, but doing this work at a national level, I know that there are many Jews experiencing this and sharing some of these same concerns. So I would like to set up that framework, and then we will move on to question and answer, and I'd be interested to hear any thoughts that town board members have about any of the things that I share. So to begin with, there's some myths and narratives, and these narratives are not 100% not true or 100% true. They sort of draw out archetypes about who Jews are. So the first one is that Jews are white. The second one is that anti-Semitism is a religious hatred. The third is that Jews are powerful, not vulnerable, and therefore criticism of Jews, especially by folks who are also experiencing oppression, is punching up, and therefore it's not so bad, or maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's calling out power. And finally, that Jews are colonizers and Israel is a settler colonial project. So I'm gonna go through these one by one. The reality from my perspective is that Jews come in every color, and we have been racialized by non-Jews in our host societies, having nothing to do with how we look, having nothing to do with our skin color, our presentation. We've been racialized as Black, as Asian, as Arab, and white. Race is a social construct, and Jews have been racialized by non-Jews, typically in whatever way our host society found most negative. So in Europe, in the late 1800s through the mid 1900s, we were racialized as Black, and there was a eugenics argument for getting rid of our Blackness. In America, in the early 1900s through the mid 1900s, we were racialized as Asian, when the threat to American whiteness was perceived as an Asian immigrant threat. And now we're racialized as white, when that is a racialization that's viewed as powerful or complicit with powerful in a way that is oppressive and harmful. We see ourselves as a people, and naming us by a non-Jewish racial category doesn't change our peoplehood. It doesn't change our identity. So regardless of how our skin looks, regardless of how we present, and we may identify as Black, brown, white, Asian, but we are a people and we are Jewish. So we're not, for example, I am not a white person practicing a religion or whatever race I identify with based on the way I present or based on whatever other personal heritage or cultural factors I have. I am a Jew living my peoplehood, living my Jewishness. On the right, we're viewed as non-whites, attacking white supremacy, using Black and brown allies in order to do that. And on the left, we're viewed as almost the whitest of the white, partly because the idea is that we're centering our own oppression as an appropriative way to marginalize Black and brown communities. This is particularly painful for those of us who have family or live in communities where our extended families were murdered in unimaginable numbers for being non-white within living memory. And I'll say I'm of Lithuanian extraction. Lithuanian Jews had a 2% survival rate. So really, really painful to be murdered for being non-white and then to be attacked for some perceived whiteness or categorized with some perceived whiteness, both by outside non-Jewish groups. Both narratives are harmful on the right and the left. Both of these are forms of anti-Semitism, and both of these have cost Jews their lives. 2, anti-Semitism is not religious hatred, it's racism. Anti-Semites don't like us any better when we stop praying. They hate our identity and our peoplehood. On the right and the left, they use words like cockroaches, termites, dirty Jews. This is not about the prayers we say or whether we eat bacon. This is a racial hatred. Jews make up less than 1% of the world's population. And when we use tropes and narratives that racialize Jews, we are not punching up. It is putting a target on the backs of the world's oldest surviving oppressed minority. Number 3, some Jews experience power, but we are all vulnerable. Anti-Semitism is cyclical. It doesn't operate like many forms of racism as a perpetual and exploitive state of dehumanizing, devaluing, and erasing the achievements of racialized minorities. Anti-Jewishness comes in waves. We're never truly admitted to the ranks of whiteness and power, and we are never truly viewed as part of the people. Whether those in and out groups are racial, class-based, or otherwise, we're a convenient scapegoat for both sides. When the economy goes bad, when we need someone to blame, decades of Jewish achievement and security vanish overnight. At this moment in history, American Jews are very grateful that no one is coming to exploit our labor or over-police our communities. We are not systemically denied equal access to education or healthcare like many racialized minorities are, but we are portrayed in the media as a people apart, smart, manipulative, taking roles behind the scenes, and our identity is never fully accepted. So when anti-Jewish hate rises, they come to kill us all, and our purported whiteness or power or perception will make us no less dead. We have come within a gasp of extinction within living memory. So seemingly privileged and secure Jews who are white presenting respond to anti-Semitism with the vehemence you'd expect from someone who knows their life hangs in the balance. American Jews are by and large people who left or fled countries where the Jewish people were later exterminated en masse. Perhaps you could say we are naturally selected to notice and respond to Jew hate with alarm and action. I've heard this called paranoia. I call it historical memory. Our racialized trauma lives in our DNA, and we treat any warning sign seriously because we know that our lives depend on it. When non-Jews gaslight us by saying Jews are not oppressed or minimize Jewish pain, it's not as bad as what some other group may be experiencing, for example, or invoke Jewish stereotypes that we are white, that we're protected by power, that we are colonizers, therefore cannot speak about our own oppression. What we see, and again, I'm speaking for myself and for those of you who feel like what I'm saying represents you, we recognize the latest in a 2,000+ year history of slander and blood libel. Invoking these tropes makes us less safe, whether it is done explicitly or by implication. If you would not talk this way about another minority, don't do it to Jews. Finally, Jews were not welcome in Europe and fled for our lives in the last century. Nor were we welcome in the Arab Peninsula countries, where we were murdered and expelled by the hundreds of thousands in the Farhud. The idea that Jews came to the land of Israel as colonizers is ahistorical. Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, and when our adopted countries murdered and expelled us, we fled back to the only country in which Jews ever enjoyed self-determination. We were granted a country by the UN. History has proved over and over again that Jews are not safe without self-determination, and the future of Israel is the Jewish future. The cynicism of referring to indigenous people as colonizers in their own land is erasive and seeks to dispossess Jews of our history and identity, turning us into proxies for Europeans, who are the very ones who tried to exterminate us. The miracle of Jewish survival in the face of overwhelming odds raised the Jewish people from the ashes of near extinction and has converted us from a people living on sufferance, forced to apologize for failing to die, to a proud people who believe in each other and our unique destiny. White settler colonialism is a story accurately told about many situations around the world, including the United States. though I don't often hear calls for ending the United States or that the United States is an illegal settler colonial project. I think that argument could be made. It is inapplicable and deeply anti-Semitic to use the framework of settler colonialism to describe the founding of an indigenous sovereign state of Israel. Thank you. So at this moment, what I'm going to do is move over to Q&A. And I will say a big thank you to our board members for coming out. These are hard conversations. These are painful conversations. We received a lot of questions from the community. We were not able to include them all. And we really tried to focus on questions that would be productive and also have a real discussion. So what I'm going to say today is it takes courage to have these conversations. And all of the people who came out today to do that deserve to be appreciated and commended for their willingness to have hard conversations, to hear a differing viewpoint. And ultimately, we all live here. We have to live together. And to me, my goal for today was to share my perspective and then find common ground. So to all of our panelists, thank you. I'm not asking you to accept my framework that I've just shared. I just hope that we learn to understand and see each other's perspectives a little bit more deeply. So I will start here, and I guess anyone can answer, and I will start to sort of go through and call on folks as we go through to make sure that we're hearing from everybody. If you feel that someone else said what you would substantially said, I think it's okay to say pass. I agree with whatever point someone else made. So the first few questions are on safety and security in our Brighton community. There have been several safety incidents impacting Jews in our community, including Jews being filmed, anti-Jewish slurs being shouted out from cars, defacement at a Brighton apartment development with a swastika owned by a Jewish family, and on social media, incessant vitriol. But it's hard to know where all this is coming from. How can our Jewish community be informed and aware of these incidents? What will you as town leadership do to change the culture that has given rise to this increase? I guess Supervisor Maley, I'll start with you because you're at the left of my screen.
Sure, thank you, Javier. You are right about describing these incidents, and in the slides you went through a number of others, and they are real and they are very important. Let me try to address the first part of the question per se. How can our Jewish community be informed and aware of incidents? And before I do that, I also want to thank you, all of the organizers, you for your powerful and very authentic introductory words, and also Monica for your words to extend ground rules for our discussion today, because like with any discussion of difficult topics, having ground rules like those are really important to the success. The Jewish community made a conscious decision, the Federation made a conscious decision a couple of years ago that it was important, as did other federations and other communities, to bring someone in to address security in the Jewish community. And in doing so, they made the best possible choice. Our former police chief, Mark Henderson. And Mark has, I know, worked tirelessly addressing concerns that come in various different shapes and sizes. In terms of inform and aware of incidents, obviously Mark Henderson and our current police chief, Dave Cathaldi, worked together hand in glove for many, many years within the Brighton Police Department. Their communication is regular. My communication, particularly with Chief Cathaldi, but also with Mark Henderson, is ongoing. And certainly one of the topics that is a regular is addressing and communicating anti-Semitic acts and words. If there is more if the community believes there should be a greater level of communication. One thing I've learned about Chief Cathaldi over the years is he is extremely open in his willingness to communicate and to talk. His phone number, 784-5101, he gives it out regularly. And I know that's a number that I can give out. We want to know if something happens, no matter how, what form it takes, we want to know. And obviously one of the ways that that is done is by calling 911, but also by reaching out directly, whether it's to Chief Cathaldi, whether it's to Mark Henderson, or whether it's to myself. And we will work with the Jewish community to make sure that there is a level of communication. I know we're going to be talking about safety broadly. That is just, if there's anything more important to what we do as local government, I don't know what it is. The safety of everyone who lives in the community is vital. The second part of the question probably is tougher. What will we do? What will I do? What can we do as town leadership to change the culture that has given rise to this increase? And I think you've correctly pointed out that so much of it is happening at a larger level on all parts of the political spectrum, and frankly, in the non-political spectrum. I think a lot of the people that are spewing hate are not politically active. You may not be able to easily tag them somewhere on a political spectrum. I think what it's important that we do is think globally and act locally. As a leader, it's very important for me personally to have ongoing relationships. You know, in the last week, I spoke personally with several of our rabbis in the community, as well as leaders of Jewish organizations about anti-Semitism and about other topics. We may not be able to change the world one person at a time, but one person at a time, we can and we will make a difference here in Brighton, and what we do here in Brighton will resonate in the lives of the people that are here on the call. Anti-Semitism, I'll just close by saying, anti-Semitism in any form is not acceptable in Brighton or anywhere else, period.
Thank you. I would like to open it up to the town council members. What do you, and I'll specifically address, how do you as town council leadership feel that you can change the culture that has given rise to this increase? Do you have thoughts or ideas about what is changing and what we can do as a community to come together to prevent things from changing in a direction that is divisive and scary and toxic for the Jewish community?
Lauren, if I might,
Please.
this is Chris Warner. I noted, I believe my first town board meeting, which was around just at the end of 2011, 2012, that there had been an anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic incident, and now I see the picture that gave rise to it.
Yeah.
What we can do is continue to speak out now, just not at town boards, but in our conversations at home, around the cocktail tables and such. But at that time, I made it very clear that whoever acts in this fashion insults me. I take that personally. Now, perhaps you're unaware, but my wife is Jewish. And this sort of behavior is intolerable, and I make it clear at all times that I will not tolerate it. What can we do on a community-wide level? I can simply say, continue to speak out.
Thank you. Other council members, if you'd like to address this, and we do have many questions, so don't feel you have to say something if you feel like your point of view has already been represented.
Lauren, thank you. Jason Ponzio here. And just very briefly, I agree with what my colleagues before me have had to say. My concern is that one of the statements at the beginning of the program is that people are concerned and have apprehension about reporting incidents and telling their stories. And if we could find out why that is, why people have these concerns, why there's that fear of reporting these incidents, then we could come together and address how to make it so that we can become aware. If we're not aware of the incidents that are going on, it's difficult for us to address it. But I know that we've always had a very good relationship with the Jewish community here in Brighton, and that we strive to have that relationship continue into the future, and that it's a partnership. Whatever we can do, we need to keep those lines of communication open.
Thank you. And I just am taking my moderator's privilege to answer just for myself and my own family. When we've experienced anti-Jewish incidents, there's this feeling that there's no point, and it really, I've had a passing car throw some stuff at us and had passing cars yell slurs. And it's usually at my husband and my sons because a lot of folks don't know that hair covering is a Jewish practice for some women. But they know what the kippah and the tzitzit are. And so it's just like, okay, well, I could do it again, I guess. I could call the police again. When they threw it was like a drink. It's like an iced coffee. That was probably the scariest because I was with my kids. But on the whole, the sense of like calling and waiting for the police. And I will say, I think partly living in a culture where it's like not cool for Jews to talk about their experience of oppression. It's like you again, talking about this again. I have some internalized oppression about bringing it up. And I spent years working in spaces that explicitly dealt with racial justice all day long and really never brought it up or talked about it. And that's my own internalized beliefs and feelings that led to me doing that. So I'm not putting that on anyone but myself, but that at least is what's been going on with my family. So I really appreciate you making that statement, because I wonder if there are some opportunities to talk further and think about ways in which we could share our points of view, or when people have experiences that make them feel less safe. And one of my hopes today was that when there are things that people are concerned about, that we do have conversations like this. So again, just appreciating you all for coming out.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for sharing that, because that enlightens me to understand your point of view from your personal experiences.
Yeah. Christine, I saw your hand.
Yes. So I wanted to, so my husband and I moved to Brighton in 2007. One of the very specific reasons we chose Brighton is that we are a blended family. My husband is Jewish. We wanted a community where we saw diversity, but also where we fit. And that was very, very important to us. In my role as town council member, reading some of the comments already in the Q&A, the one that stabs my heart the most pointedly is one commenter said that being the object of anti-Jewish hate, they didn't report it because as it was just a part of Jewish life. And my husband has shared that perspective with me. Our friends and family have shared that, and no one should carry that with them day in and day out, and especially not in our community. To the point of possible practical ways for moving the needle on that, this ugly aspect of that's rising up in our culture. I chair the Public Safety Committee. Chris Warner sits on it with me, as well as Bill. And we meet monthly. Every month, and in the town board meetings, I announce and ask the community, please bring matters of concern to our attention. We've got all of the public safety agencies at the table right there, ready and willing to hear about concerns, about any sense of dis-ease, discomfort. It's public safety, not just the being prepared for the ambulance to get to your neighborhood, or the firefighters to get to your home, or the police responding to low-grade issues. It's the Public Safety Committee where all of those first responders who are responsible for guarding and protecting our community are available and at the ready. And I recognize that that is asking those who are already feeling uncomfortable and under attack, putting a certain responsibility on them that is not necessarily the responsibility they should have to shoulder, but it is an opportunity, it's a venue, it's a place, and any one of us at that table, we are always willing to be contacted offline, personally, and directly as well.
Thank you.
No,
Councilmember Wilt.
Thank you so
Sorry,
much.
hands
Sophia.
up.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Monica, for creating this space. I will say that as a Black woman, I definitely am connected with you in your pain and your view that sometimes calling the police is not the first thing that I want to do. I will say that I can only speak from these experiences from the perspective of a Black woman. But I, have faced my own challenges in Brighton, and so it is personal for me. I can also say that hate crimes are not tolerated by Brighton Police Department or those on the town board. The supervisor and former police chief have been targeted by white nationalist organizations for investigating and ultimately resolving crimes related to the posting of white nationalist flyers within the town. And, I know that we've experienced hatred in this community as a blended Black and white family, including my son being called the N-word on the bus. And I will say that when crimes are committed, I think it is important to make sure those incidents are reported to Brighton Police Department. Those incidents will appear on the weekly police blotter that is a matter of public information and is a resource to others within the community about what is going on. And I think when it comes to change in culture, I think we need to move from divisiveness to inclusion as a community and refrain from viewing concern and love for any particular community as detracting concern or love from other communities. And I think ultimately our concern and love for one another is what will keep us safe. Not police necessarily responding in the aftermath of trauma that has been inflicted, but being together in community and respecting one another.
Thank you so much. I think that's really well said from all of you. In the interest of time, I think we're going to skip around just a little. So some of the questions we have echo a lot of the topics that you guys all spoke to, that Brightonian Jews feel not safe to wear Magen David or to put up a mezuzah. They're concerned about their kids. And I guess I'm going to kind of paraphrase what I think underlies a few of the questions is, why do you think Jew hatred is surging now? Both physically in our community and on social media and some of our community fora. And I know some of you are aware, we had a lot of anti-Jewish Zoom bombing in the last year with COVID and synagogue services going online. And what do you as a town board think that we should be doing about this in our community with your leadership? So again, you don't all have to speak to this, but if anyone has a thought, what's top of mind. And then again, we have so many questions to get through. I know we won't get to all of them. So just I'm really appreciating whatever thoughts that you feel like you can share in response to this.
Lauren, if I might just begin here, I think we are just beginning to emerge from this past era when bigots were given license to spew their hatred liberally. America has been badly damaged these last 4 years. And we have to now just declare how intolerant we are of that behavior and try to make it a change as a nation to regain our balance. And it's unfortunate, but it's going to take some very hard work.
Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts they want to share? You know, why is this surging now and what should we be doing about it?
Well, I certainly agree with what Chris said. It is surging now, and as the comments a moment ago about fear of reporting and fear may not be the right word, a decision, for many reasons not to report incidents. These incidents are clearly terribly underreported. And yes, from a law and order perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, if you go through the well-known incidents here in Brighton, there have been arrests made, and they have been handled in some cases with restorative justice and in some cases with more traditional penalties for the crimes involved. But I also think Brighton is a community that has long been not perfect, far from it, but unique in its in the willingness of the community through interfaith activities, organized and person to person. And I think an example of the latter, I wrote about it, but it involves one of the organizers tonight. After the incidents here in Brighton with flyers being thrown into driveways, both here and in Pittsford, I called together a number of individuals, and out of that group came CURB, Community Uprooting Racism in Brighton. And by the way, those flyers were both racist and anti-Semitic. They contained elements of both, although to a certain extent, the anti-Semitic elements may have been a little more subtle. And after the first meeting, Rashid Muhammad approached Monica Gabel because Monica had identified in that group as Jewish. And Rashid asked Monica if he and his wife could join them for Shabbos dinner some evening, because it was something he had never experienced, and he genuinely wanted to understand more about his neighbors. And so they did. And Monica wrote about that. It was, if I recall, published in Rochester Magazine. It was as beautiful a piece of writing as I've ever seen, but it was as beautiful an action on both of their parts as you could ever want to see among 2 or 4 or slightly larger number of human beings. It shows what we can do. It shows what we can do as human beings to turn back this just terrible upswing of anti-Semitism. And in our own ways, we have to make that effort. And I know everybody that read that story, it opened eyes, it opened my eyes, and we just need to continue to find ways as human beings to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to skip ahead because we have a lot to get through, and just more than we could cover in the amount of time that we have. So as many of you are aware, a recent post by board member Wilt on her concern for the human rights of Palestinians and her history with and respect for Linda Sarsour was the beginning of a community conversation about how we talk about these issues, how Jews respond, what responses we have, and really led us to come here today to say, we need to be thoughtful about the words we use and how we talk to each other. So the question that I have here is, given the geographic boundaryless nature of social media platforms, what is the role and responsibility of public officers in posting on social media? And how do we do this well? Should there be a personal versus private capacity? What do you guys say sort of as elected representatives? And what do you guys say, just as a human being, this is a cause I care about and I want to talk about? And how can we, if there are, so that we have better conversations, how should we be reaching out to each other when we have differences about the thoughts and feelings expressed?
Well, I'd certainly like to answer that because, of course, it is my personal page that was at the center of this. And I do have a personal page and an official town board page. My personal page does not bear the same name that I use in my role in government. The target audience of my personal page are family and friends, many of whom I organize with in support of human rights causes that I'm engaged in. I don't think that legally we have any responsibility as board members to post to social media. As I mentioned, though, I am a human rights activist. I post about single-payer healthcare, housing equity, educational equity, police brutality, mass incarceration, foreign conflicts and peace activism, environmental justice, economic equity, and then just personal family celebrations, sporting interests, and other topics, and because it's my personal page, and my avocation is my civil rights activism. So I think as an elected official, I do have free speech and freedom of association rights, just like any other individual. But I would say that if people are uncomfortable with my advocacy for the myriad causes that I am constantly posting about, then, please don't follow my personal page, follow my elected official page, or don't follow me at all. But my advocacy in all these topics well predated any role I had in government. And it is based in my moral grounding in the pursuit for human rights. And so that advocacy is not going to end anytime soon. It is literally what got me involved in an elected capacity in town government. And so and that's about all I have to say on the matter.
Yeah, well, I just want to clarify the question a little, because to me, the question is less, I don't think anyone thinks you shouldn't speak about issues you care about in your personal life, or if they do, that's not what we're talking about today. The question is how do we have these conversations well? And when you're an elected official, your words speak really loudly and people look to you. And I know, because I've seen you work so hard to build our community over the years, I know you to be a person who is conscious of the mantle of leadership and that your words are impactful. So I think, to me, the question is how do we do this? And then when we have disagreements, how do we do this well? So what to me sort of precipitated this was the use of the term Free Palestine, and there was some back and forth about what does it mean. So I think the organizers of this call, there's really a strong baseline agreement that Palestinian rights are human rights, that we care about the safety and self-determination and dignity and justice for humans, but specifically Palestinians, and I would speak to that in other contexts if we're talking about other groups of humans, but in this case, that there are really many, many terrible situations, and we are desirous of and in solidarity with the desire of Palestinian people to live in safety and freedom, but that the term Free Palestine for us evokes from the river to the sea, Free Palestine, which is a phrase that is used to mean Jew-free, that all the Jews should be pushed into the ocean. So these become trigger words and they become hard topics to talk about. And I think, first of all, you very graciously agreed to have this conversation today. And second of all, posted to say, that was not my intent, here was my intent. So to me, the question about how we use social media when we're having these really hard moments or things that are divisive in our community, is broader than just you in this post, but includes that. And I guess, I don't know if you want to speak to how going forward would we approach a moment like this where, you're wanting to express your solidarity with and activism for the Palestinian community. And we don't want to restrain that, but we do want to ensure that that nothing grows out of that is anti-Jewish, because so much of the advocacy, so much of the hashtag Free Palestine on the internet is followed with hashtag Hitler was right. So how to unpack those related things, the same way other social justice movements have their slogans co-opted or have slogans that get associated with really dismissive approaches to human rights. How do we do that here when we have a community that is so identified and so connected to this issue?
I think that's a really good question. I think that hashtags do get co-opted. In the case of hashtag Free Palestine, it was trending, meaning millions of people were organizing peace rallies under that hashtag, teach-ins, peace rallies, all sorts of activities, many of whom were my friends and I have been organizing with in the context of the movement for human rights and civil rights in this country. And so I think that conversation, engaging people is really important. And I think not making assumptions about what is meant by, any given hashtag. And one of the things that I believe as a Black woman is that intent is not as important as impact. So upon, realizing that this hashtag Free Palestine label was negatively interpreted by people, the first thing I did was apologize for impact, because I think the hashtag means many different things to many people. And so it's important to say, hey, that was not my intent, but I recognize that negatively impacted you. And I acknowledge that and I apologize for that. And I was very open and did that immediately. And many times thereafter. So I think that being willing to engage people in conversations, I had a number of people reach out to me, both privately and publicly, to talk about what was meant by that. I will be the first to say that in solidarity with those people with whom I have been organizing, using that hashtag, I thought it was important to center the people who were being directly impacted by the lack of human rights. And in that centering, you don't talk about, Israeli rights in that context. You don't talk about Hamas, you really talk about the people who are being directly impacted, just as in the case of organizing for Black Lives. You talk about the people who are being directly impacted and whose human rights you're advocating on. And only in that focus will you be able to see those people and join them in their struggle and be a true ally. So I think that in focusing on the directly impacted people, there was perhaps a loss of the larger picture. And again, for that, I'm sorry.
Well, I appreciate your perspective there, and I think this is really one of the fundamental points of departure here, is that Jews don't see ourselves as don't agree that I can't speak for all Jews. I apologize for that phraseology. That the narrative that I'm sharing of the Jewish folks that I've been talking to, it's not Palestinian human rights are the directly impacted human rights. They are part of a situation where their human rights are directly impacted, as are Israeli and Jewish human rights, as are the human rights of Jews all over the world. So to say, and that has been some of the challenge, is that, and I'm saying this at the top, and I hope that I articulated it clearly, because it is a nuanced point, that the idea that Israel and Jews are powerful, and therefore the other group is vulnerable, and therefore that's the group that should be centered, and therefore you should not address or invoke or center Jewish pain, is the idea that we're saying that's not an acceptable framework. It's not accurate, it's not historical. And I don't know if you're familiar, there's a ton of research and scholars who talk about this, and activists and human rights workers who talk about this, but the idea that the Palestinians are this sort of unique group who are uniquely being oppressed here, as opposed to part of a larger group that's drawing on international resources and is ethnically and religiously contiguous in a much larger context, and we're all sort of fighting for the right to live and be free and be safe, can't be reduced to these simple narratives of oppressor and oppressed. It's not this clear cut, and some of the words that get used, genocide, ethnic cleansing, are wrong words. There are more Palestinians now than there were in 1948 by orders of magnitude. And when rockets are being fired into your home, you don't feel like you're an oppressor. You feel like you're being oppressed when there are stabbing victims. And walking around the city, you get stabbed. There was the Fogel baby was 3 months old when she was stabbed in her crib by a terrorist. So seeing ourselves as a community that's experiencing this, to have someone say, but I can't center Jewish pain because I'm centering Palestinian human rights because they're somehow in the center of the circle of oppression, and I have to center that, not to ignore something else, is, I think, the philosophical point of departure here that's so challenging. When anti-Jewish incidents happen, we would like to be centered, and we're not. The response is, okay, but something else is worse, so it doesn't matter. And I'm not saying this is your response, I'm saying this is a response that we deal with in the world. When the Tree of Life massacre happened, the response is, yeah, but Israel, or this was a protest against, or since that was white supremacy, that was a white supremacist, then it's easy, and we say, okay, he was a white supremacist. But when somebody who's not a white supremacist takes Jewish life, that's treated really differently. And I'm sorry, I'm emotional about this topic, so I'm responding in a lot of depth, but I'd like to move on because we have a question that is specifically addressing, I think, what you brought up. Monica, can you go to the teach-in questions? So there was a Stand with Palestine teach-in that came about after this. And one of the quotes from that teach-in was that it was hard to get the Palestinian message out in Brighton because there are too many Jews, or Brighton has a lot of Jews. And there were Jewish folks in attendance and really took this to heart and came back and said, wow, I heard this and it really impacted me. And it's these kinds of statements that I think are making this conversation so sensitive. And I'd like to understand from your perspective, what did you mean by that? How do you approach it? Would you still view it that way? Can you share your perspective?
Okay, I'm glad that we're talking about this because I literally did not say that. That speech was recorded, and the entirety of that statement, the only time that I ever said the word Jewish in my entire remarks, is that it is important that we stand in solidarity. And I will say that true allyship involves sacrifice. I know it's hard in a town that has a significant Jewish population to stand up for Palestinian human rights. It's not easy to stand up for what is right all the time, or what is right and what is just all the time. But that doesn't negate our responsibility.
So
And
can you tell me what it means when you say it's hard in a town that has a significant Jewish population to stand up for Palestinian human rights? Because to me, that doesn't sound different than the way this is framed. So help me unpack that.
Yeah, too many Jews, that is not tantamount to what I said at
So
all.
help me, what's the difference between significant Jewish population and too many Jews?
It's hard sometimes to be in allyship with people who are being oppressed. That is what that means. And that's not saying that there are too many Jews. And
Who are you referring to in that? Who are the people being oppressed?
Again, standing up for Palestinian human rights. This was a teaching that centered Palestinian voices and those who had family in Gaza. And again, this was a statement involving allyship with those communities. And that is, and I think it's important to emphasize that human rights are not a zero-sum game. Just because I am centering the voice of Palestinian people and those directly impacted in the conflict in Gaza in that sense does not mean that I have no regard for Israeli oppression or or Jewish global oppression. All that it means is that at that teach-in, which featured the voices of so many Palestinians who were directly impacted, that I was standing in allyship with them. And sometimes it is hard. And, sometimes, it is hard to stand up for Black lives too, when when the overall narrative is that somehow this means that you're against predominantly white spaces. That's just not true. What we're doing is focusing on the people being directly impacted at the time. And
But do you think that Israelis are not directly impacted? Is that the because when you say directly impacted folks were being focused on,
right, this is a Stand with Palestine teach-in. So these were directly impacted voices of Palestinian community.
So I guess my question is, what does it mean that it's hard to be an allyship in a community with a significant number of Jews? What does that mean? Why is that hard? And what does the number of Jews in the community have to do with the challenge of being an allyship?
I was being attacked because I've spoken out in support of Palestinian human rights. And it was part of the reason I was invited to speak at the teach-in, where really my goal was to listen and be in community with people who were directly impacted, is because many of the people there felt seen, felt heard, felt like I was identifying with their plight. And it was hard. To this date, nobody else on the drawing board has really said anything in support of Palestinian human rights. And these are literally people who have organized with me. These are people who have centered human rights in the Black Lives Matter movement, and taken risks and still been by our side.
So I guess I'll say I think that's sort of the source of some of my pain here about this conversation, is that I have stood next to some of those same people in racial justice fights, and I hear not word one from them when there is an anti-Jewish attack. And if I ever say something like Jews have the right to self-determination, or we don't want to die, and that's why we think it's important to have our own country or political power, the first word out of it, I'm attacked right away. And I've been attacked many times for this. The first word I hear is, you're a racist, this is ethnic cleansing, this is genocide. So I guess I sort of, maybe the best way to say this is to skip to, there's another question. Monica, can you go, I don't know if it's one slide on or two slides on. Yeah, no, after that, thank you. Nope, after that, thank you. So after the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, you wrote a post that didn't center Jews. It said Jews are, experiencing an outpouring of support, and that's great, and I stand with it. But we don't talk enough about Black pain. We don't talk enough about pain for other communities. Jews are a predominantly white minority. It's great that they get attention, but we're erasing the lives of people of color. And that seems to me not to be consonant with this idea that you're centering the directly impacted folks at the time they're having that experience. So it seems to me like there's a special disconnect when it comes to Jews. And I'd love for you to tell me, like, nope, you're wrong, you're crazy, and here's why. Because, again, you and I share, like, the overlap of our beliefs and the things that we fought for and stand for is so large, right? I would really love to find a place of common ground here. Help me understand, why do you see it differently, or do you see it differently? And if you don't, how does this sort of fit into the way that you see it?
Yeah, and I think this is why it's so important to have direct communication and really understand context. So let me lend context to this statement.
Please, yeah.
I had just spent about an hour on the phone speaking with a constituent who is Black and Jewish. Many of the statements she expressed, we commiserated over the context of our conversation. And I shared my feelings in the immediate aftermath of that conversation. And I would implore everyone on this call to think about this comment from the perspective of a directly impacted Black woman who is also Jewish, because so few of us live at that intersection. And she was working through what she saw. Mm-hmm. And I would point out that I was speaking of events that occurred over the course of 10 days. It was, I think, 9 days between the two events, and there were several things happening in between. The Louisville retail store slayings at the Tree of Life Synagogue slayings were abhorrent, and they were both motivated by hate. And I was appalled by and posted about both. And I emphasized in the post that we should all be speaking out against hate and embracing the communities affected by hate. Both of these were almost coincident. But there had been many, and this is why my friend called me. There had been many who had ignored what had happened in Louisville and expressed sadness about Pittsburgh. And that's the intersection at which my friend found herself. And I wanted to articulate her pain in solidarity in her struggle. And it's not saying that one or the other is true or valid. It is that both things can be true at the same time. And that's how we truly see one another, at the intersection of our struggles. And it is, so that's where I'm coming from, long and short.
I really appreciate that context. That is helpful. The more we talk, I do think that it helps to understand perspective, because as a Jew, reading that from someone I know to be a non-Jew feels a little bit like like it wasn't okay to take a moment to say this happened and it's terrible. And because if you were to post solely about the erasure of anti-Black violence and the narrative about how anti-Black violence is viewed, I think everybody would be like, yes, you're right, we should absolutely be talking about this. But to say it in the context of this got attention and this didn't feels like it's not centering the directly affected folks in that moment. So having that context about your conversation and why your intention there was solidarity is really helpful to me. I have one other question here that I would love to hear from you, and then I would really also love to hear from the other board members. And again, I just want to say, the point of today was not for us to all think the same thing or agree. The point was to understand each other better and build relationship, hopefully by having some hard conversations. So I just want to say, I know this has been hard for me, but I do feel like I've been gaining a greater understanding as a part of it. I hope that's true for you folks in the audience, and Councilmember Weld, I hope that's true for you. I've really appreciated you being willing to speak from the heart and be genuine about some of these really challenging events. Monica, would you go back, I think 2 slides?
Sure. I just want to remind everyone who wants to speak that we have about 5 to 10 minutes remaining.
Okay, so maybe I'll phrase this question, and then I would like to hear from Councilmember Welt and really all the council members or Supervisor Maley, which was, this was also about the teach-in, saying somebody closed the teach-in by saying, I think it was Iman, but I haven't watched, I don't remember who said what in the video because I wasn't there in person, said something like, nothing said today here was anti-Semitic. And just like other racialized minorities, Jews feel like we get to define what is and isn't anti-Semitic. So to have a non-Jew say, I'm not being anti-Semitic, I'm doing something else by their own definition, feels like a microaggression. So I wanted to know, that wasn't something you said, Councilmember Welts. I wanted to know your thoughts on that. How did that land for you when you were there? And then I'd love to hear from the other council members and Supervisor Maley as well, really about any of these sort of hard things that we've talked about. And Councilmember Weld is correct to say she's the only one who has really been public about this conflict and about the human rights abuses. And, and as you can see, it's not easy. It brings on really hard conversations. And that's been true for me when I've done it, and it takes a lot of fortitude to do that and be in public life and still have these hard conversations. So again, when we are able to do this and talk as a community, I do think we're all richer for it. So please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's inappropriate to comment on anything that anyone else said in the teach-in. I was honored to be asked to speak as an observer and not someone who is directly impacted. As a Black woman, I feel strongly that when directly impacted folks are speaking from their lived experiences, it's important that we listen and we find common ground. And I don't think that it's appropriate to tell directly impacted folks how to challenge or engage in the struggle against their own oppression, right? And I think that I will say that objectively speaking, the goal is emphasizing the importance of just people who maybe are not directly impacted in that way, recognizing what is at the source of the pain in the lived experience. And similarly, people who are not Black, knowing what is racist so that they can disrupt it if they see it is important. And I think that in order for anyone to be in solidarity, in any sort of ism, it's important to have these conversations about what the source of pain and how you are directly impacted. And so that when these types of situations manifest in spaces where directly impacted groups are not present, that those in allyship can take up that mantle, right? And so that is why I went to the event. I think it's important to acknowledge and respect those lived experiences. And so
can I drill
yeah,
down with just, I'm so sorry.
go
Can I
ahead.
drill down with just a little specificity to really, the context that this came up in was this teach-in, but the question is, do you believe it is appropriate for a non-Jew to define what is and is not anti-Semitism?
Well, I think that there's no uniform agreement on the matter among directly impacted folks.
There's a widespread agreement. You're right that there's not 100% agreement, but there's like 80 to 90% agreement, at least based on the recent Pew surveys. So I guess it's not, then the folks who don't agree are very, very vocal, as they have every right to be. It's their own lived experience and they can take a different view. But for folks who are not sort of within that space, I think my concern, and I'll just speak for myself, is that when somebody picks, the small minority of Jews who say this is not anti-Semitism and ignores or says, but it's okay that it's not anti-Semitism because this one Jewish person said it, when the 85 to 95% of the Jewish community who feel differently are saying this is anti-Semitism, it makes us less safe, please don't do it, feels a little tokenizing. So that's my feeling. I don't know that that's necessarily what's operative here, but I don't know that it's not. And so to me, that's why, I thought this question was helpful in sort of bringing out ways in which it feels like anti-Jewish issues are treated differently than other issues of racism and oppression for marginalized minorities. And that's why I wanted to ask in just a clear way, how does this sit with you? Do you believe it's appropriate for a non-Jew to define what is and is not anti-Semitism?
And we can open this up to other board members.
Yeah, thank you, Monica.
Javier, thank you, Monica. I mean, I think what we just heard is even if there isn't an agreement on exactly what is anti-Semitic, that demonstrates, frankly, for someone, particularly someone who is not the target of anti-Semitism, to say nothing said here today was anti-Semitic, I don't believe was an appropriate statement to be made. I think that we have, as someone who has myself been an activist since the days of the Vietnam War, I think we have seen in Charlottesville, we have seen in incident after incident, anti-Semitism and racism demonstrated through dog whistles, demonstrated through apocalyptic language that is inappropriate, raises the temperature in a way that is not productive in a community or in the world. So
are you defining racism and anti-Semitism in those statements? Though, when you say that, Bill, when you say, I think we've seen it, and I think are you then doing exactly what this question asks, and again, I did not say it. And so no, I did not.
And by the way, if I could, Robin, yeah. You are correct, because I have heard your speech. Mm-hmm. I've had several people put words in your mouth that you did not say. You accurately described what you said at that speech. I have concerns about it, but I have real concerns with people also putting words into your mouth that you did not say. But no, on January 6th, the fact that Donald Trump didn't say, go to the Capitol and try to hang Mike Pence, doesn't change the fact that he was dog whistling loud as hell politically. 20 years ago, when people were opposed to a trail and came into a town board meeting and said, those people are going to go on that trail, they're dog whistling loud as hell. So words don't have to shout something vilely anti-Semitic or racist to be anti-Semitic or racist, is all that I'm saying.
And I would agree. And I think that as allies in this fight, we need to be able to recognize those dog whistles. And it's not for the purpose of labeling or tokenizing. It is for the purpose of being in allyship, in true allyship, and speaking up when people refuse to see that the overall context is harmful to a particular group.
So I just want to, I'm so sorry. Monica, you go ahead. I would love to hear what you have to say.
I just wanted to open it up just in case other board members wanted to speak their piece before we wrap in a few minutes. Okay.
I'll jump in here just to say I know that there is a desire from the Jewish members of our community, members of other groups in our community, to hear solid leadership coming from elected officials. Each one of us at that town board table leads in a different way. Some from leveraging social media platforms, others by engaging one-on-one or in other settings. I can only speak for myself, but my leadership in this town is based entirely on equitable connection amongst everyone, equitable access to our community, and all in our community have the utmost right to feel heard, to feel represented, to feel protected, no matter their personal circumstances, no matter their personal background, no matter the community that the smaller community that they engage in within the bigger context of Brighton. And I am open to hearing from anyone about their concerns about being underrepresented in our town, or about being made to feel lesser or less protected. Brighton is a strong, positive community. It's a diverse community, and it is a model in so many ways. And that is the only reason that I serve on the town board, because I value the diversity, the equity, the commitment to ensuring a good and positive and healthy life for the members of our community. If those weren't the underlying values, underlying collective values of this community, I wouldn't live here, and I certainly wouldn't be serving in elected leadership. And I couldn't be myself in this community if our broader values didn't reflect my personal values. And so I'm really grateful for this conversation, because it's personal and it's professional. It is, and it's a conversation we're all having. Again, speaking for myself, we're having within my home and amongst my family members and amongst my neighbors. And this is so important. So we have to live up to the aspirational values that we espouse, that we talk about all the time when we talk about why Brighton is beautiful and wonderful. And we have to be mindful of how we're presenting ourselves as elected leaders. We have to be mindful how we are presenting ourselves as community members, and we have to think about the forum in which we're communicating and how we're communicating it. So you may not see me taking big issues to social media, for example, because it's a sticky place to be doing that. But you can engage with me at any time on these matters, on any sticky matter, one-to-one or in the setting of our public meetings. And I'm so grateful for this setting, this public setting. So thank you for bringing this together. And please, anyone on this call, talk to me at any time about any of your concerns or any of the things any of the good that's come out of this conversation.
Thank you, Christine. So I guess I want to close by sort of asking a final question, and if anyone has
I'm
thoughts
sorry.
about it.
Javier, I'm so sorry, but our Zoom time is about to run out. And so I think we're going to need a final closing
Okay.
statement just of genuine thanks for everybody's authenticity and showing up today. I know this was not easy for anybody to talk about, and the fact that you stuck through it really speaks to your character. So thank you, everybody. Robin, this couldn't have been easy, and I appreciate even just personally that you are here and speaking. Ahavia, thank you very much for your comments and insights and helping to moderate this discussion. At this point, I'm going to have to very quickly wrap up just to say that we will be following up with some information for the community, as well as the narratives that I talked about earlier. If anybody has any questions for the organizers of this group, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. Thanks very much, everybody, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.